I stared at the $10.5 million in my account. It cost me years of sleepless nights and working until my hands went numb. Instead of celebrating, I called my family and told them I was bankrupt. 4 days later, their chilling reactions proved they only loved me when my wallet was open. By the end of this, none of them could pretend they did not know what hit them. My name is Lucy Martin. I am 36 years old and living in Charlotte, North Carolina. I built an enterprise human resources software company called Threadline Systems from absolute scratch. I missed holidays and slept under my desk more times than I could count. Today that chapter finally closed. The screen of my laptop illuminated the quiet darkness of my home office. I sat there completely paralyzed as I stared at the bank portal. The wire transfer had cleared. The acquisition by the corporate giant Halcyon Grid Technologies was finalized. The balance staring back at me was $10,500,000. It did not look real. The text spelling out the massive deposit felt like a glitch. I pressed my hands into my eyes and looked again. The numbers remained unchanged. A massive, suffocating weight I had carried for years evaporated, leaving me dizzy and breathless. I wanted to cry. The tears prickling my eyes were a chaotic mix of exhaustion and a fiery sense of vindication. My family had always viewed my ambitions with pity and annoyance, seeing me as a workaholic throwing my youth away on a pipe dream. I reached toward my phone resting on the mahogany desk. I needed to call my mother and my younger brother. I wanted to hear the exact moment their condescension shattered against the cold, hard reality of a massive financial exit. My fingers barely brushed the cold metal casing of the phone before another hand clamped down over mine. It was a firm grip. I looked up and saw my husband, Ryan Hale, standing beside my chair. He had been watching me from the doorway. I expected a hug, or for him to grab the champagne we had been chilling for 3 days. I expected a loud cheer. Instead, his face was a mask of solemn concentration. He did not say congratulations. He did not smile. He just kept his hand firmly planted over mine, trapping the phone against the wood of the desk. "Do not tell them yet," he said quietly. His voice carried a heavy weight that immediately sliced through my euphoric haze. I blinked up at him, feeling deeply confused. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice raspy. The wire cleared Ryan. "The money is sitting right there. It is over. We won. I just want to tell my mother. I want them to know we finally made it to the finish line." Ryan let out a measured breath. He pulled a chair over and sat down right next to me, forcing direct eye contact. "I know you do, Lucy. I know exactly how much you crave that validation from them. But I want you to stop and think for one single minute before you make that call. Think about the pattern." I bristled immediately, pulling my hand away. "What pattern are you talking about?" "Every time your mother or brother calls, what is the tone of the conversation?" he asked, leaning forward. "When was the last time they called just to ask if you were sleeping enough? When was the last time they invited us to dinner without sliding a veiled request across the table right around dessert? They are intensely warm and incredibly present right up until the very moment you write the check or sign the guarantee for whatever temporary loan they desperately need. Then they vanish completely until the next emergency strikes." Anger flared in my chest, hot and sharp. "You are being entirely too cynical." I snapped back at him. "Yes, they have asked for financial help in the past. We are family. That is what families do when things get tough. They are just a little self-absorbed sometimes. They are thoughtless, not mercenary. You make them sound like parasites." Ryan did not flinch or raise his voice. He just watched me with those steady, perceptive eyes. "I am not trying to be cruel to you, Lucy. I am trying to protect you. You just secured enough wealth to change the trajectory of our lives forever. If you call them right now and announce you are wealthy, they will throw you an absolute parade. They will tell you how proud they are and how they always believed in your vision. But you will never truly know if they are cheering for you or cheering for the human cash machine you just became." I glared at him, the pure joy of the moment rapidly souring into a bitter, heavy pit in my stomach. "So what is your grand plan then? I just lie to them forever and hide the money?" "No," he said softly. "You test them. You call your mother and you tell her the deal fell through at the last second. You tell her Threadline Systems collapsed under mounting debt, and you had to file for personal bankruptcy. You tell her you are completely broke. I stared at him in horrified silence. The suggestion felt completely insane. It was manipulative and dark and went against every instinct I possessed. I cannot do that, I whispered, shaking my head. If they are just thoughtless like you claim, Ryan continued, his tone unwavering, then they will rally around you in your darkest hour. They will offer a couch to sleep on or a hot meal. But if I am right, their reaction in the next 72 hours will tell you everything you ever need to know about whether they love Lucy the person or Lucy the open wallet. The silence in the room stretched out thick and suffocating. I desperately wanted to scream at him to get out and let me have my hard-earned moment of triumph. I wanted to prove him wrong with absolute certainty. But as I sat there glaring at his calm demeanor, an ugly, insidious seed of doubt began to take root deep in my mind. Unbidden memories started flashing behind my eyes. I remembered the panicked, late-night call from my brother demanding immediate cash to avoid eviction, while he was simultaneously posting pictures from a very expensive lounge on social media. I remembered my mother entirely forgetting my birthday, but remembering to ask me to cover her premium auto insurance renewal the very next morning. The memories stacked up, creating a suffocating tower of evidence I had spent years meticulously ignoring. I looked down at the phone sitting on the desk. The burning urge to call and brag had completely died. The screen of the laptop was still glowing with the massive bank balance, but the numbers suddenly looked less like a glorious reward and more like a massive glowing target painted directly on my back. "Fine," I muttered, my voice sounding completely hollow. "You want proof? I will give you your proof. But I'm not calling them right now." Ryan stood up, giving my shoulder a gentle, reassuring squeeze before stepping back into the shadows of the hallway to give me space. I did not reach for the phone. Instead, I shifted my gaze back to the laptop monitor. I opened a new browser tab and typed in the administrative credentials for the legacy accounting system we used at Threadline. The interface loaded with a sluggishness that used to infuriate me, but tonight I barely noticed. I bypassed the revenue projections and navigated straight into the raw financial ledger. I set the filter parameters to meticulously capture the last 5 years of data. I typed in my mother's maiden name, my brother's name, and the names of their respective shell companies. I hit the enter key. The database churned for a few long seconds before populating a list of transactions that scrolled down far past the bottom of the screen. I started clicking through the attached invoices, the wire transfer receipts, and the hastily written email approvals I had sent at 2 a.m. while desperate to get back to my actual work. Line by line, column by column, the terrible truth began to materialize in stark, undeniable black and white. There were no emotional interpretations to be found here. There were only concrete dates and massive dollar amounts. I spent the next 2 hours digging relentlessly through the digital archives. The deeper I went into the records, the colder my blood ran. The sheer volume of capital that had bled out of my company and my personal accounts under the guise of temporary family emergencies was absolutely staggering. I saw the exact patterns Ryan had pointed out rendered in irrefutable data points. I saw the immediate radio silence that followed every single cleared check. I saw the fabricated expenses and the manipulated narratives they had fed me over the years. I closed the laptop with a soft, definitive click. The room was cast back into complete darkness. I sat in the silent office, the ghost of the spreadsheet still burning itself into my retinas. The hot anger I had felt toward Ryan an hour ago was completely gone. In its place was a chilling, crystal-clear realization that settled over me like a heavy winter coat. My husband was not being paranoid. He was not being overly cynical. He was simply the very first person brave enough to say the ugly truth out loud to my face. He had called out the exact thing I had been desperately avoiding for far too long. And looking at the mountain of evidence I had just unearthed, I knew exactly what I had to do next. The 72-hour countdown was about to begin. The glow of the screen cast long shadows across my office. I was no longer just looking at numbers. I was performing a clinical autopsy on my own familial relationships. I pulled up the statements for the secondary corporate credit card I had issued to my mother, Diane Mercer. The explicit agreement when I handed her that plastic was that it existed solely for medical emergencies. She was getting older, and I wanted to ensure a sudden hospital visit or a massive prescription cost would never cause her panic. I filtered the spreadsheet by merchant category. There were no copays. There were no pharmacy charges. Instead, line after line detailed exorbitant charges at a luxury wellness retreat in Sedona. There were multiple debits for hot stone massages, eucalyptus body wraps, and premium facial treatments. I cross-referenced the dates with her social media history. She had told me she needed a week of quiet rest for her severe migraines. She had used my emergency medical fund to fly business class to a resort and drink champagne by a heated infinity pool. The audacity of labeling a 5-star vacation as a medical necessity made my blood run absolutely cold. I felt a physical ache in my jaw from clenching my teeth. I closed the tab for Diane and opened the file labeled for my younger brother, Travis Mercer. A year and a half ago, he had come to me practically in tears, begging for a capital injection to expand his personal training studio. He pitched it as a do-or-die moment for his business, claiming he would lose his entire client base if he did not upgrade his facility immediately. I approved the wire transfer because I fiercely believed in his dream. Now staring at the categorized expense reports, he was legally obligated to upload. The truth of his expansion was laid bare. Not a single dollar went toward new weights, cardio machines, or hiring additional trainers. He had blown the entire sum on custom-imported Italian leather sectionals for what he called a very important person recovery lounge. Worse, a massive chunk of the capital was used as a down payment on a top-of-the-line luxury sport utility vehicle. He registered the imported truck under his business name to secure the tax write-off, all while draining my personal liquidity to fund his flashy image. He was driving around town projecting massive success entirely funded by my sweat. Then there was my sister-in-law, Brooke Mercer. I navigated to the vendor payment portal and typed in her consulting firm name. For 2 solid years, my company had paid Brooke a generous monthly retainer for what she designated as brand strategy and market positioning. I opened the company's shared cloud drive and searched for any document, presentation, or spreadsheet authored by her. The search results came back completely empty. I dug into the legacy communication channels and email servers. There was absolutely nothing. She had never delivered a single piece of actual work. She attended a few preliminary video calls, offered vague buzzwords about synergy and aesthetic alignment, and then happily cashed a massive check every single 30 days. I had essentially been paying her a hefty salary simply for existing in my brother's life and calling herself a consultant. My chest tightened as I moved to the final and perhaps most infuriating folder. My stepfather, Glenn Mercer. He was a man who prided himself on his traditional values and financial prudence. Yet he was the one who had cornered me during a family dinner to co-sign a bridge loan. He claimed he needed temporary leverage to renovate a dilapidated lakefront boathouse he had purchased on a whim. He looked me dead in the eye and swore on his honor he would clear the debt in exactly 6 months once his seasonal dividends paid out. I pulled up the secure banking portal and checked the status of that specific loan guarantee. The principal balance had not decreased by a single fraction of a cent. It had been hanging over my credit profile for 3 long years. He was making the absolute bare minimum interest payments just to keep the bank from calling me directly, using my pristine credit score as a permanent shield for his reckless real estate hobby. Each row of data was a surgical strike against my naive loyalty. I leaned back in my chair and let the sheer scale of the deception wash over me. Whenever I had gently inquired about repayment timelines over the past few years, they had expertly turned the tables. They deployed soft voices and calculated guilt trips, telling me how difficult the economy was or how much pressure they were under. If I pressed even slightly harder, I was immediately branded as the ruthless corporate machine who cared more about accounting ledgers than her own flesh and blood. They made me feel deeply selfish for simply wanting my own hard-earned money returned. They weaponized the concept of family to ensure I never closed the vault. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. During the rapid scaling phase of my company, my former chief financial officer had noticed the alarming outward flow of capital to my relatives. He was a strict, no-nonsense veteran of corporate finance who flatly refused to let me bleed my own equity dry. He had instituted a mandatory policy that every single dollar leaving the company or my personal accounts for family assistance had to be backed by a formal paper trail. Because of his relentless nagging, I now sat on a pristine digital vault of legally binding promissory notes, electronically signed loan agreements, explicit email confirmations, and text messages acknowledging the exact terms of every single debt. They thought they were taking advantage of a soft-hearted sister and daughter, completely forgetting that they were actually dealing with a heavily documented corporate entity. I exported the entire historical ledger into a master spreadsheet and highlighted the outstanding totals. I ran the final summation function. The number that populated at the bottom of the column made my stomach physically drop. The collective amount of unreturned capital was staggering. It was more than enough to purchase a beautiful second home in the mountains outright. It was enough to seed a robust private investment fund that could generate passive income for decades. They had siphoned off a small fortune drop by drop, crisis by manufactured crisis, smile by deceitful smile. The financial loss was sickening, but the emotional betrayal was a completely different level of pure agony. I vividly remembered the exact periods when these transactions occurred. During the time Travis was out shopping for luxury vehicles and Diane was getting pampered in Sedona, I was locked in a windowless conference room fighting for survival. I was working 70 to 80 hours every single week. I was missing meals, losing sleep, and fighting off absolute physical and mental burnout to keep my company afloat and my employees paid. I was sacrificing my health and my youth to build something real. Meanwhile, my family was standing on the sidelines criticizing me for being entirely too obsessed with money, all while simultaneously reaching deep into my pockets to silently fund their leisure and their vanity projects. The vague, uneasy feeling of being utilized that had haunted me for years was completely gone. I no longer had to wonder if I was being overly sensitive or unfair to my own blood. The ambiguity had been permanently burned away by the cold light of the computer monitor. I had concrete data points. I had irrefutable timelines. I had a perfectly clear, high-definition picture of profound greed wearing the comforting mask of familial love. I sat in the quiet dark of my office, feeling the last remaining shreds of my familial guilt evaporate into the thin air. I closed the master spreadsheet and saved it directly to my encrypted desktop. The time for giving them the benefit of the doubt was officially over. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady and resolute. It was time to invite them all to dinner. I picked up my phone on Thursday morning and dialed the numbers one by one. I told each of them I was hosting a mandatory family dinner this weekend because I had a massive financial development to discuss. I kept my voice entirely neutral and professional. Not a single person asked if I was okay. Not one of them asked if I was stressed or tired from the weeks of negotiations. My mother simply gasped and asked if I was catering from that incredibly expensive coastal seafood place downtown. I told her yes. She said she would wear her good pearls and hung up immediately. Ryan stood by the kitchen island chopping vegetables for a side salad. He watched me end the final call with my stepfather. Ryan did not say a word to me. He just offered a sad, knowing nod. We spent Saturday afternoon preparing the dining room together. I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect. I wanted the setting to be as opulent as they expected, so their true intentions would surface without any friction or hesitation. We laid out the imported linen tablecloth and set out the fine china we received as a wedding gift but never bothered to use. The catered spread arrived exactly at 5 in the evening, featuring massive platters of chilled oysters, butter-poached lobster tails, and perfectly seared scallops. It was a feast fit for a massive celebration of newly acquired wealth. My mother Diane was the first to arrive. She practically floated through the front door. She was wearing a new silk blouse and her signature heavy perfume filled the entryway instantly. She grabbed me by the shoulders and planted a dramatic, exaggerated kiss on my cheek. She was radiating a frantic, manic energy. She looked around the house as if she was already calculating the square footage for a massive structural upgrade. She told me how proud she was of my hard work and how she just knew this glorious day was coming. Her eyes were constantly darting toward the dining room, checking the size of the seafood spread. Travis and Brooke arrived 20 minutes later. They did not bring a bottle of wine or a simple dessert to share. Instead, my brother walked in carrying a thick, glossy color-printed portfolio bound in heavy leather. He slammed it down on the entryway console table with a loud, heavy thud. He was practically vibrating with nervous excitement. Brooke followed right behind him, wearing a designer dress that cost more than my first car. She gave me a tight, practiced smile that completely failed to reach her eyes. Glenn walked in last. He gave me a firm, stiff handshake and immediately asked Ryan what kind of premium scotch we were pouring tonight. We moved into the dining room and took our respective seats. Ryan sat at the far end of the table, acting as the silent observer. I sat at the head. I decided to stick strictly to the plan we had discussed. I would let them drive the conversation entirely. I would let them show their hands and lay out their expectations before I revealed a single actual detail about my financial situation. The porcelain plates were barely filled before the ambush truly began. Travis did not even wait for everyone to start eating their first course. He reached under his chair and pulled out the thick leather portfolio. He slid it directly across the polished wood table until it hit the base of my water glass. He leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the table. He told me he had found the absolute perfect real estate opportunity. It was an abandoned industrial warehouse district on the edge of the city limits. He wanted to gut the entire block and build a hybrid luxury wellness club and high-end evening lounge. He used complicated corporate words like vertical integration and demographic capture to sound legitimate. He spoke rapidly and waved his silver fork around for dramatic emphasis. He told me the municipal zoning was already approved and all he needed was a massive injection of first-round capital by the end of this current month to secure the anchor property. He looked at me with hungry, desperate eyes and casually mentioned a figure in the low seven figures as if he was asking me to pass the black pepper. Before I could even process the sheer breathtaking audacity of his demand, Brooke smoothly and seamlessly inserted herself into the active pitch. She took a delicate bite of a scallop and dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin. She looked at me and said that if I decided to go big and fund Travis, she would personally step in to handle all the corporate branding and external media strategy. She smiled sweetly and told me she would even offer the family a heavily discounted retainer fee for her exclusive services. She framed it as a massive charitable favor to me. She was openly offering to take my money to market a business funded entirely by my money. I looked down at my expensive plate. The rich, buttery smell of the lobster was suddenly making me physically nauseous. I took a slow, deliberate sip of ice water. I did not say yes, and I did not say no. I just nodded slowly and let the heavy silence hang in the air. That tiny window of silence was all Glenn needed to pivot the conversation directly to his own personal agenda. He cleared his throat loudly while swirling the expensive scotch in his crystal glass. He completely dismissed my brother and his wellness lounge idea with a quick flick of his hand. He looked directly at me and shifted into his authoritative patriarch voice. He announced that he had been closely monitoring the luxury real estate market up north near the mountains. He found a massive, sprawling lakefront estate that was significantly underpriced due to a highly motivated seller. He told the entire table that right now was the critical moment for the family to secure tangible physical assets to preserve multi-generational wealth. He spoke about the massive estate as if it was a collective democratic family decision. He talked about where we would park the new boats and which master bedrooms would belong to which family members during the upcoming summer holidays. He never explicitly asked me for the money. He simply operated under the ironclad, unspoken assumption that my incoming capital was the sole engine that would purchase this multi-million-dollar vacation compound. He looked at me and told me he needed a firm binding commitment by Tuesday morning so he could instruct his broker to lock in the escrow account. The absolute pinnacle of the evening came right as the empty dinner plates were being cleared away. Diane had been sitting quietly absorbing all the competing aggressive pitches from her husband and her son. She suddenly clapped her hands together sharply. She smiled a bright, terrifying smile that showed all her teeth. She announced to the room that we were all thinking entirely too small. She looked around the table and declared that it was officially time to establish a formal family office. She had been reading various magazine articles about how ultra-wealthy families pooled their resources together to manage vast investments, handle philanthropic giving, and minimize heavy tax burdens. She looked directly at me and said that my financial success was a divine blessing for the entire bloodline. She proposed setting up a corporate structure where my incoming millions would be professionally managed but democratically distributed among us all. She envisioned a system where she and Glenn and Travis would all sit on a formal board of directors, making executive decisions on how to allocate the funds I had spent years of my life bleeding and suffering to earn. She spoke with absolute breathless conviction. She honestly believed that the moment the funds hit my bank account, they magically transformed into communal family property waiting for her royal distribution. I sat completely frozen at the head of the table. The dining room was buzzing with an electric, chaotic energy. My brother was arguing loudly with my stepfather about liquid asset allocation versus long-term real estate holds. My mother was loudly dreaming about hiring a full-time wealth manager who would report directly to her personal phone. My sister-in-law was typing furiously on her mobile device, likely already drafting a premature press release for her imaginary new branding contract. I looked down the long table at Ryan. He was staring back at me from the opposite end. His expression was completely blank, but his eyes held a profound, devastating sorrow for me. He was watching my heart break in real time. I looked around at the people who shared my exact blood. We had been sitting at this table for nearly 2 hours. We had consumed thousands of dollars worth of premium seafood and rare aged liquor. They had pitched imaginary businesses, demanded luxury vacation homes, and attempted to legally restructure my entire financial existence to benefit themselves. And in all that time, through all those elaborate presentations and aggressive entitled demands, not a single one of them had stopped to ask me a single personal question. No one asked how the grueling final days of the corporate acquisition went. No one asked how I felt now that the relentless, crushing pressure of running my company was finally over. No one asked what my personal dreams were, or what I wanted to do with my own life now that I was finally financially free. I was not a daughter in this room. I was not a sister. I was not even a human being to them anymore. I was simply the host of a mandatory funding round. I was a living human bank vault, and they were just loudly arguing over who got to punch in the access code first. The noise in the room reached a fever pitch as Travis started aggressively defending his projected profit margins to Glenn. The air in the dining room felt incredibly thin and hard to breathe. The sickening realization coated my throat like thick, heavy ash. Everything Ryan had warned me about was playing out in spectacular, horrific detail right in front of my face. The trap was fully set. The greedy audience was perfectly primed. It was finally time to drop the match and burn it all down. I pushed my chair back from the head of the table. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. The sudden sharp noise cut through the chaotic, overlapping pitches and demands. Travis stopped mid-sentence. Brooke lowered her phone. Glenn set his crystal glass down. Diane looked at me with an expectant, hungry gleam in her eyes. They all thought this was the exact moment I was going to open the floodgates. They thought I was standing up to give a grand speech about family legacy and officially hand over the keys to the vault. I placed my palms flat against the smooth surface of the dining table. I took a slow, deep breath, pulling the air into my lungs until they physically ached. I looked at each of their faces, committing their eager expressions to memory. "There is no family office," I said. My voice was completely flat and devoid of any emotion. "There is no luxury compound by the lake. There is no seed money for the wellness lounge. There are no branding contracts." The hungry gleam in my mother's eyes flickered and died. A deep collective frown rippled across the table. They stared at me in profound confusion. The acquisition deal with the buyers fell apart at the absolute last minute. I continued, forcing the fabricated words out of my mouth. The final audit revealed critical structural liabilities. Threadline systems collapsed entirely under the weight of accelerated corporate debt. The company is completely gone. The buyers walked away. The bank called in the operational loans. I have absolutely nothing left. I am filing for immediate personal bankruptcy. The silence that slammed into the dining room was absolute and suffocating. It was not the kind of silence born from shock or deep empathetic grief. It was the heavy, terrifying silence of a massive vacuum sucking all the oxygen out of an enclosed space. No one gasped. No one covered their mouth in horror. No one jumped up from their chair to rush over and wrap their arms around me. The air grew instantly frigid. I watched the collective realization wash over them. I watched the imaginary millions they had just spent the last 2 hours dividing up evaporate into thin air. They were mourning the sudden violent death of their own unearned wealth. Travis was the very first person to break the heavy silence. His face twisted into a mask of pure panicked frustration. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not ask if I was going to lose my house or how I was going to feed myself. "Are you telling me the capital injection for my project is completely off the table?" he demanded. His voice was loud and entirely devoid of any sibling affection. He leaned forward aggressively. "You promised me you would look at my portfolio. I have contractors waiting for a deposit by Monday morning. You cannot just pull the rug out from under me like this. What exactly am I supposed to tell my real estate broker?" "I just told you I'm facing complete financial ruin," I replied softly. "I am drowning in debt and you are asking me about your contractors." Before he could snap back at me, my mother abruptly shifted in her chair. The color had completely drained from Diane's face, leaving her skin an unhealthy ashen gray. Her hands were shaking visibly. She did not reach out to comfort her ruined daughter. Instead, her manicured fingers dove frantically into her expensive designer purse. She dug around until she pulled out her leather wallet. She flipped it open and yanked out the corporate supplementary credit card I had given her. She stared down at the small piece of plastic as if it had suddenly turned into a venomous snake. "Is this card going to be declined?" she asked. Her voice was thin and sharp with absolute panic. She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "I have an entire month of holistic treatments booked starting next week. I already authorized the holding fee. Are you telling me this account is frozen? You have to leave this specific line of credit open until I can figure out my personal scheduling." She was staring at personal bankruptcy, and her only concern was whether her luxury spa treatments would bounce. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. It was the absolute confirmation of everything Ryan had warned me about. Glenn did not waste his time with panic. His reaction was pure calculated self-preservation. He leaned his heavy frame against the table and glared at me. The jovial patriarch from 5 minutes ago was completely gone. In his place was a ruthless stranger. "What exactly did you disclose to the bank regarding my boathouse renovation guarantee?" He growled. His voice was low and menacing. His eyes narrowed into tight slits. "You listen to me very carefully. You are not going to drag my pristine credit profile down into your pathetic sinking ship. You need to call the loan officer first thing tomorrow morning and legally sever my name from your catastrophic mess. I am not paying a single dime for your corporate incompetence." I looked at the man who had asked me to risk my own financial security to fund his weekend hobby. "You promised you would pay that loan off 2 years ago," I reminded him quietly. "Now you are calling me incompetent." Brooke scoffed loudly from across the table. The sweet, supportive sister-in-law routine evaporated in less than 60 seconds. She threw her linen napkin down onto her half-eaten plate of expensive scallops. The disgust on her face was visceral. "This is absolutely unbelievable," Brooke snapped. Her voice dripped with pure venom. "Why would you force us to come all the way over here and waste our entire evening? I canceled a highly exclusive networking event to sit here and listen to you announce you are a complete failure. You showed a shocking lack of respect for our time. You should have just sent a brief email instead of staging this dramatic little pity party." I let my shoulders slump forward, intentionally projecting an image of total, utter defeat. I looked around the table, letting my voice crack slightly. "I really do not know what I'm going to do," I whispered, looking directly into my mother's eyes. "The lawyers are talking about asset seizure. The banks might take the house by the end of the month. I do not even know how I'm going to buy groceries or keep the lights on for the next few weeks. I am so incredibly scared." I threw the bait out into the open water. I gave them one final golden opportunity to step up and act like a real family. I waited for someone to offer a guest bedroom. I waited for someone to offer a small temporary loan. I waited for a single word of basic human comfort. The silence returned, but this time it was hostile. They looked at me as if I had just announced I was carrying a highly contagious disease. They physically recoiled in their chairs. Diane aggressively shoved the useless corporate card back into her purse and snapped the golden clasp shut. The sharp metallic click echoed in the quiet room. She stood up abruptly, smoothing down the front of her expensive silk blouse. "Well, you are an adult," Diane said coldly, looking down her nose at me. "You made your bed, and now you have to lie in it. And let me make one thing absolutely perfectly clear to you right now. Under no circumstances are you allowed to use my home address for any of your legal correspondence. I will not have debt collectors or repo men knocking on my front door because you failed to manage your little software business. Do you understand me? Keep your toxic financial mess entirely away from my property." Travis was already standing up, grabbing his thick leather portfolio off the table. He did not even look at me. He just muttered something under his breath about having to make emergency calls to find real investors. Brooke linked her arm through his, her face locked in a tight scowl. Glenn finished the last drop of his premium scotch and set the empty glass down hard. "We are leaving," Glenn announced to the room. Less than 10 minutes had passed since I uttered the word bankruptcy. In less than 600 seconds, my entire family had completely shed their loving, supportive disguises. They did not linger to offer condolences. They practically sprinted toward the front door as if they were fleeing a burning building. They did not say goodbye. They did not look back. The heavy oak front door slammed shut, vibrating the walls of the hallway. The sudden quiet of the house was deafening. I sat completely motionless at the head of the long table. The air still smelled heavily of my mother's perfume and the rich, buttery seafood. I looked down at the expensive feast they had happily devoured, using the very money they now despised me for losing. Ryan walked slowly from his end of the table and stood behind my chair. He gently rested his hands on my shoulders. His touch was the only genuine warmth I had felt all evening. I did not cry. There were no tears left to shed for these people. The painful, agonizing uncertainty I had carried for years was permanently gone. They had shown me exactly who they were with brutal, devastating clarity. The trap had worked perfectly. They thought they had just escaped a sinking ship. They had absolutely no idea that they had just locked themselves entirely out of the most secure vault they would ever encounter. 2 mornings passed since the disastrous dinner. 48 hours of complete and utter silence from the people who shared my blood. No phone calls checking on my mental state. No text messages offering a warm meal. Just a profound, echoing absence. I woke up on Tuesday with a hollow feeling in my chest. Ryan was already awake, sitting at the kitchen island with a cup of black coffee. I told him I needed to run an experiment. I needed to execute one final stress test on my family just to ensure there was absolutely no room for doubt or future guilt. I was not going to ask for thousands. I was not going to demand they repay the massive loans they owed me. I was going to ask for the bare minimum of human decency. I drove across town to the premium fitness center my brother Travis operated. I parked my modest sedan a few spaces away from the imported luxury sport utility vehicle he had purchased using my diverted business capital. The truck was gleaming under the mid-morning sun. I walked through the sleek glass double doors into the reception area. The space smelled of expensive eucalyptus and fresh rubber. Travis was standing near the front reception desk, reviewing a printed schedule. He looked up and saw me. His entire posture instantly stiffened. The welcoming smile he reserved for paying clients vanished entirely, replaced by a defensive and irritated scowl. I walked over to him, keeping my voice low and completely stripped of any demands. I told him the bankruptcy proceedings were moving much faster than anticipated, and the bank had placed a temporary freeze on all my personal checking accounts. I explained that Ryan and I were facing immediate eviction from our home. I asked him a very simple question. I asked if we could throw a couple of sleeping bags in the empty storage studio located directly above his main workout floor just for one single week while we figured out our next legal steps. Travis did not even pause to consider the logistics. He did not ask if we had anywhere else to go or if we had money for food. He crossed his arms over his chest, pushing his shoulders back aggressively. He looked around the lobby as if my very presence was somehow repelling his wealthy clientele. He told me absolutely not. He lowered his voice into a harsh, aggressive whisper. He said he was running a high-end wellness brand built entirely on the concept of manifestation and absolute success. He looked me dead in the eye and said he simply could not afford to have my failure energy lingering inside his building and polluting the mindset of his staff. He called my hypothetical financial ruin a toxic aura that he refused to let cross his threshold. I swallowed the hard lump of absolute disgust rising in my throat. I nodded slowly, accepting his brutal rejection without a single argument. I decided to lower the bar even further to see how deep the cruelty went. I asked him if Ryan could at least park our car overnight in the dark alley behind the gym for a few days, so it would not get repossessed from our driveway by the aggressive debt collectors. It was a request that would cost him $0 and zero effort. Travis shook his head aggressively. He claimed his commercial lease agreement was incredibly strict regarding overnight vehicles. He spun a ridiculous lie about security patrols and liability insurance, completely ignoring the fact that he routinely let his friends park their luxury cars back there after late-night parties. He was entirely unwilling to offer me a patch of dirty asphalt. He turned his back on me and walked away toward the heavy weight room without saying goodbye, abandoning his destitute sister in the middle of his pristine lobby. I walked back out to my car. The rejection stung, but it was a very clean and clinical pain. I started the engine and drove directly toward the affluent suburban neighborhood where my mother Diane and my stepfather Glenn lived. The drive took exactly 45 minutes. I pulled up to their immaculate two-story colonial house. The front lawn was perfectly manicured. The flower beds were blooming with expensive seasonal arrangements. I walked up the paved brick pathway and rang the polished brass doorbell. Diane answered the door. She was wearing a plush cashmere sweater and holding a delicate porcelain teacup. The moment she saw me standing on her porch, her face hardened into a mask of pure annoyance. She did not open the heavy screen door to let me inside. She kept the wire barrier securely between us as if poverty was an airborne disease she might catch. I did not waste time with small talk. I kept my posture defeated and my voice perfectly pathetic. I told her the power company was threatening to shut off the electricity at our house by tomorrow afternoon. I asked her if she could possibly loan me exactly $600 just to clear the immediate utility bill. I promised her with absolute sincerity that Ryan would repay her the entire amount the very second his next corporate paycheck cleared on Friday. It was a microscopic fraction of the money she had siphoned from my medical emergency fund for her luxury spa retreats. Diane slowly lowered her teacup. She looked me up and down with an expression of profound pity, mixed with intense revulsion. She took a deep breath and launched into a cold, practiced lecture. She told me that bailing me out would only enable my poor financial habits. She said that a grown adult must learn how to clean up the messes they create for themselves. She spoke about personal responsibility and the harsh realities of the real world. As she lectured me about financial discipline, she gestured repeatedly with her left hand. The morning sunlight caught the heavy gold and diamond tennis bracelet wrapping gracefully around her wrist. It was the exact same piece of custom jewelry I had purchased for her 50th birthday using my very first major executive bonus. She was standing there wearing thousands of dollars of my hard-earned affection while loudly refusing to hand me $600 to keep my lights on. I looked past her shoulder. Glenn had stepped out from the main hallway and was standing directly behind her. He had a folded newspaper tucked under his arm. He heard every single word of my desperate plea and every single syllable of her cruel rejection. He did not step forward to intervene. He did not gently suggest they could spare a few $100s for his stepdaughter. He simply stood there with a grim expression on his face and nodded slowly in total agreement with his wife. He was silently endorsing the absolute freezing out of my existence. Diane told me she had a charity luncheon to attend and could not stand around arguing all morning. She firmly closed the heavy wooden door right in my face. I heard the solid metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place. I turned around and started walking slowly down the brick pathway back toward my car. I had not even reached the concrete sidewalk when my phone buzzed violently in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the illuminated screen. It was a notification from the family group chat. My sister-in-law Brooke had just sent a message to everyone. She did not know I was standing in my mother's driveway, but Travis had clearly already called her to complain about my visit to the gym. The message was displayed in bright, sharp letters across my screen. Brooke complained that everyone needed to lock their doors and ignore their phones because Lucy is starting to knock on doors begging for pocket change. She added that it was deeply embarrassing and that I was acting like a desperate vagrant trying to drag the entire family down into the mud with me. I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still on the concrete sidewalk, staring at the cruel text message. The morning breeze rustled the leaves of the expensive oak trees lining the wealthy street. 2 days ago, I had been crying in my office, mourning the loss of a family I thought I loved. Today, standing under the bright sun, reading those hateful words, I realized something entirely different. I did not cry. My eyes were completely dry. The heavy, suffocating sorrow that had weighed down my chest for years was entirely gone. In its place, a new sensation was rapidly blooming. It was something incredibly sharp and brilliantly cold. It was absolute crystalline clarity. I slid the phone back into my pocket. I opened my car door and slid into the driver's seat. I started the engine and merged back onto the main road heading toward the city. The experiment was officially concluded. The test results were conclusive and undeniable. Familial love did not exist here. It never had. The final shred of my hesitation was burned away, leaving behind a purely mechanical determination. They had made their choices with terrifying ease. Now it was my turn to show them exactly what happens when the vault finally fights back. The sun had barely set when the first notification chimed on my laptop. It was just past 7 o'clock in the evening. I was sitting at the kitchen counter with a glass of tap water. I opened the email application. The sender was my mother, Diane. She had copied my brother, Travis, my sister-in-law, Brooke, and my stepfather, Glenn. The subject line was completely devoid of any warmth. It simply read, "Regarding the current financial situation." I clicked the message open and read the paragraphs. The language was jarringly formal. It did not sound like a mother writing to her child. It sounded like a corporate entity drafting a strict liability waiver. Diane explicitly stated that the family was officially declaring zero responsibility for my recent business failures. She wrote that my catastrophic mismanagement was entirely my own burden to bear. The second paragraph was a direct list of demands. She ordered me to completely cease any unannounced visits to her residential property. She demanded I stop calling family members to beg for petty cash. The final sentence was the most chilling. She explicitly forbade me from mentioning her name, Glenn's name, or any of their business ventures to any bankruptcy attorneys, court-appointed trustees, or debt collection agencies. Before I could even process the sheer absurdity of her preemptive legal defense, my phone vibrated violently against the marble counter. It was a rapid succession of text messages from Travis. He was evidently emboldened by our mother laying down the law. His words were entirely venomous. He typed that I had spent my entire adult life pretending to be some brilliant, invincible entrepreneur. He called me a fraud. He said I was arrogant and blinded by my own ego. The final text was a blunt knife to the ribs. He said I inevitably ruined absolutely everything I touched, and he was furious that my toxic failure was now threatening his mental peace and his personal brand. I did not reply. I just stared at the glowing screen. A few minutes later, another email arrived in the group thread. This one was from Brooke. She had attached a PDF file. Her accompanying text was sickly sweet, masking a deeply sinister intention. She called the attachment a clear record of our familial financial history. She suggested that since I was facing a complex legal audit, they should all be proactive and help me organize my chaotic paperwork. I downloaded the file and opened it. It was a beautifully formatted ledger. Brooke had clearly used her so-called branding expertise to design it, but the contents were a complete fabrication. Every single massive loan I had ever issued to them was retroactively categorized as an unconditional gift from the heart. The capital for my brother's gym was listed as a sisterly donation. The money my mother drained for her spa trips was labeled as an informal allowance. They were actively trying to reclassify hundreds of thousands of dollars in legally binding debt into untraceable personal gifts to ensure the bankruptcy courts could never claw that money back from their bank accounts. Ryan walked into the kitchen and saw me staring intensely at the fabricated ledger. He stood behind me and leaned over my shoulder to read the document. His eyes scanned the neatly arranged columns and the deceptive descriptions. He reached out and placed his hand over the computer mouse. He clicked on the File Properties tab and navigated to the Advanced Metadata section. "Look right here," Ryan said softly. His voice was incredibly steady, but laced with a sharp edge of realization. "Look at the document creation timestamp and the last modified timestamp." I followed his finger to the tiny gray text on the screen. The file had not been created years ago when these transactions actually occurred. The creation date was today. The timestamp showed it had been generated exactly 45 minutes ago. The last modified stamp was only 10 minutes before Brooke sent the email. A cold chill radiated down my spine. They were not just being greedy anymore. They were actively sitting in their houses writing a fake history. They were manufacturing fraudulent documents to protect their own assets from a federal bankruptcy proceeding they fully believed was happening to me. "This is not just family drama anymore," I whispered to Ryan. "This is an active conspiracy to commit fraud. They are trying to tamper with what they think is a federal financial investigation." I immediately picked up my phone and dialed the private cellular number of Naomi Price. Naomi was my absolute best friend and the lead corporate attorney who had guided Threadline Systems through its earliest legal hurdles. She was brilliant, ruthless, and deeply loyal. She answered on the second ring. I did not waste any time with pleasantries. I told her I needed her to open her secure email portal right this second because I was forwarding her a mountain of highly sensitive evidence. I spent the next 20 minutes sitting on the phone with Naomi while she silently reviewed the group emails, the vicious text messages, and the fabricated document Brooke had manufactured. I also granted her temporary administrative access to the secure corporate server, where my former chief financial officer had stored all the original legally binding promissory notes and wire transfer receipts that completely contradicted Brooke's fake ledger. The line was quiet for a long time, except for the sound of Naomi typing furiously on her own keyboard. When she finally spoke, her voice was completely devoid of any humor. She told me she was running a cross-reference on the entire communication archive I had just uploaded. She said she had found something buried in the recent outgoing server logs that was infinitely more dangerous than a fake gift registry. Naomi explained that earlier this morning, my stepfather Glenn had initiated an electronic communication with a third-party commercial credit broker. She read the intercepted email aloud to me. Glenn was attempting to quietly and rapidly restructure the massive bridge loan for his lakefront boathouse. He was trying to extend the amortization period and lower the monthly payments to protect his own liquidity before my supposed bankruptcy dragged the loan into default. But that was not the terrifying part. The terrifying part was the attachment Glenn had included in his email to the broker. Naomi opened the file and described it to me in vivid detail. It was a digital scan of my physical signature. Glenn had lifted my signature from an old, entirely unrelated tax document from 3 years ago. He had cropped it, enhanced the contrast, and attached it to the new restructuring application to make it look as though I had officially authorized the new loan terms as the primary guarantor. "He committed identity theft," Naomi said flatly. The words hung in the empty kitchen like a physical weight. "He used a forged signature to attempt to manipulate a high-value commercial loan. That is not a misunderstanding. That is not a greedy family member stretching the truth. That is a massive felony. If he submits that final packet to the underwriting department, he crosses a legal threshold that carries mandatory prison time." The situation had escalated far beyond anything I had ever imagined. The petty theft and the emotional manipulation had suddenly mutated into a full-blown criminal enterprise. My family was so completely terrified of losing their unearned luxury that they were willing to commit federal crimes and forge my identity just to keep the money flowing. My initial instinct was pure, blinding rage. I wanted to call Glenn immediately. I wanted to scream through the phone and tell him I knew exactly what he had done. I wanted to threaten him with the police and watch his arrogant facade crumble into absolute terror. I wanted to reply all to the email chain and attach the real promissory notes just to prove to Brooke that her little branding exercise in document forgery was a pathetic failure. "Do not say a single word," Naomi commanded. Her voice snapped me out of my furious spiral. I am speaking to you right now as your legal counsel. You are standing on a goldmine of actionable evidence. The absolute worst thing you can do right now is alert them that you know what they are doing. If you confront them, they will panic. They will delete files. They will destroy hard drives. They will hire aggressive defense attorneys who will try to muddy the waters and claim it was all a simple familial misunderstanding. So what do? I asked. My hands were shaking so hard, I had to rest my elbows on the counter to keep the phone steady. You do absolutely nothing, Naomi replied. Her tone was cold and calculating. You maintain absolute radio silence. You do not reply to your mother. You do not argue with your brother. You let them believe they have won. You let them feel entirely safe in their little conspiracy. You let them keep typing and sending and building their own legal coffin. I am going to spend the next 48 hours compiling every single byte of data into an ironclad legal portfolio. We are going to lock down the original copies, secure the metadata, and notify the correct banking authorities to freeze Glenn's loan application without tipping him off. She paused for a moment, letting the strategy sink in. When we finally strike, she added, her voice dropping into a deadly serious register, we are not going to do it over text messages. We are going to hit them with a legally binding tidal wave that they will never see coming. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the marble counter. Ryan walked over and pulled me into a tight embrace. The kitchen was completely silent. The aggressive emails and the toxic messages were still sitting in my inbox, but they no longer held any power over me. They were no longer weapons designed to hurt my feelings. They were simply pieces of evidence. My family thought they were meticulously pushing me out of their pristine lives. They had no idea they were just cheerfully setting the stage for their own downfall. I looked at the dark window reflecting the kitchen lights. I was ready to let them hang. It was Thursday morning, exactly 3 days after Naomi locked down the digital evidence of my stepfather committing corporate fraud. The silence from my blood relatives remained completely unbroken. They were entirely convinced I was drowning in a sea of insurmountable debt. They felt secure in their cruel decision to sever all ties and leave me to drown. But Thursday was the scheduled publication date for the premier regional business magazine. Weeks prior to the disastrous family dinner, I had sat down for an exclusive and lengthy interview with their lead financial journalist. We discussed the grueling early years of Threadline Systems. I told the reporter about the freezing cold rented room where I wrote the initial software code, the years of eating cheap noodles, and the relentless drive required to survive in a ruthless industry. The magazine editors decided to make my story their massive cover feature. At exactly 8 in the morning, the digital edition went live across all major news syndicates. The physical copies hit the newsstands shortly after. The headline was printed in bold, undeniable lettering. It announced that a local female founder had successfully sold her tech startup to Halcyon Grid Technologies for a staggering $10,500,000. Directly beneath that massive number was a high-resolution photograph of me sitting at a polished mahogany conference table, smiling brightly as I signed the final acquisition documents. The trap I had set finally snapped shut. I was sitting in my living room with Ryan when the shockwave hit. My cellular phone had been resting quietly on the coffee table for nearly a week. Suddenly, the screen illuminated. A text message alert chimed loudly. Then another. Then a voicemail notification popped up. Within 30 minutes, the device began to vibrate so violently it actually rattled against the glass surface of the table. It was a chaotic, relentless symphony of digital panic. The very same people who had treated me like a highly contagious disease just 72 hours ago were now desperately trying to break down my digital door. I picked up the device and watched the notifications cascade down the glowing screen. I did not feel a single ounce of joy or validation. I only felt a cold, sharp sense of vindictive satisfaction. The absolute sheer hypocrisy unfolding before my eyes was magnificent to witness. The first massive barrage of messages came from my mother, Diane. Just a few days prior, she had slammed her heavy front door in my face, refusing to lend me a few $100s to keep my electricity running, and explicitly banning me from using her address for my imaginary bankruptcy filings. Now her tone had undergone a miraculous and sickening transformation. She sent a massive block of text, claiming she had been completely beside herself with worry. She wrote that she had not slept a single wink all week because her heart was aching for her precious daughter. The lies were so thick they were almost comical. She actually had the audacity to claim that she had spent the entire previous afternoon cleaning and preparing the upstairs guest bedroom so I could move in whenever I needed a safe haven. She painted herself as the ultimate supportive matriarch, entirely erasing the memory of her standing on her porch, wearing the expensive jewelry I bought her while coldly telling me to suffer the consequences of my own actions. Before I could even finish reading her fabricated maternal devotion, a voicemail transcript populated on my screen. It was from my brother Travis, the man who had aggressively banished me from his fitness center because my failure energy would ruin his wealthy aesthetic, was now leaving me a breathless, chuckling voice message. He cleared his throat and adopted his best enthusiastic coach voice. He told me that I had completely misunderstood his previous harsh reactions. He claimed all the venomous things he had texted me about being a toxic fraud were actually just his unique brand of tough love. He spun a ridiculous narrative that he was purposefully being cruel to motivate me, to force me to stand up and fight back against the bank. He said that siblings occasionally butt heads when tensions run high, but blood is always thicker than water. He casually suggested we grab an expensive steak dinner this weekend to celebrate my monumental victory, entirely omitting his previous aggressive demands for a massive capital injection for his imaginary lounge. Next came an email from my sister-in-law, Brooke. The woman who had drafted a fake legal document to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars and who had mocked me as a desperate vagrant to the entire family was suddenly my biggest fan all over again. Her message was dripping with sweet corporate jargon. She completely ignored her vicious behavior and instantly pivoted back to her parasitic branding scheme. She suggested that the two of us needed to sit down together like mature, empowered women. She wrote that my massive financial exit was the perfect launching pad to build a lucrative family lifestyle brand, and she generously offered to spearhead the entire media campaign for a small fee. She was still desperately trying to find a way to monetize my face and my bank account. Finally, a message arrived from Glenn. My stepfather did not lower himself to making pathetic emotional excuses like the others. He did not offer a single word of apology for his brutal behavior at the dinner. Nor did he mention his cowardly attempt to forge my signature on his commercial loan documents. His email was meticulously polite, entirely sterile, and reeked of calculated self-preservation. He formally requested that the entire family convene for a private summit this coming Sunday. He stated that in light of the new financial developments reported by the press, it would be highly prudent for us to sit down and restructure our old financial commitments in a manner that would be mutually beneficial for all parties involved. He was trying to hit the reset button before I realized the depth of his impending legal jeopardy. I sat back against the sofa cushions and let the device fall silent in my hands. The sheer volume of backpedaling was exhausting to process. They honestly believed that a few sweet words and some shallow excuses would instantly erase the profound cruelty they had inflicted upon me. They thought my lifelong desperate need for their approval would forever blind me to their transparent greed. They were completely wrong. I did not reply to a single message. I did not answer a single incoming phone call. I simply opened the settings menu and toggled the device into absolute silent mode. I walked over to my home office and booted up my heavy laser printer. I spent the next hour taking meticulous screenshots of every single text message, every single call log, and every single email they had frantically sent me that morning. The printer hummed rhythmically, spitting out page after page of warm, loving, hypocritical lies. I took these fresh sheets of paper and added them to the massive, heavily documented legal dossiers I had already prepared for each of them. I placed the thick folders into a secure leather briefcase. I was scheduled to meet Naomi at her downtown law firm in exactly 2 hours. My family was currently sitting in their respective homes, staring at their phones, eagerly waiting for me to accept their apologies and welcome them back into my life. They thought their sudden change of tone was the magic key that would unlock my $10,500,000. They had absolutely no idea that while they were busy drafting their pathetic excuses, I was meticulously and permanently changing all the locks. They had taken my generosity for granted for the absolute last time. The emotional tests were officially over. It was time to initiate the legal strike. I sat across from Naomi in her corner office on the 40th floor of her downtown firm. The panoramic view of the city skyline was spectacular, but my attention was entirely focused on the thick stacks of legal paper resting on her massive oak desk. I was completely done with crying. I was done waiting for apologies that would never come. The emotional turmoil of the past few weeks had burned away, leaving a cold and highly calculated resolve. We were not going to scream or throw things. We were going to dismantle their entitled existence piece by piece using the most ruthless and perfectly legal weapon available to us. We were going to use paper. Naomi pushed the first folder across the desk. It belonged to my mother, Diane. Inside was a formal notice of immediate termination for every single supplementary credit card, every shared bank account, and every financial authorization I had ever foolishly granted her. We did not send a polite text message. Naomi dispatched the notices via certified courier directly to her front door. The letters legally revoked her access to my funds and mandated the immediate return of the physical plastic cards. If she attempted to run those numbers at her luxury spa resorts ever again, the transactions would instantly decline and trigger a fraud alert. I signed the bottom of the termination notice with a steady hand. Next was the dossier for my sister-in-law, Brooke. Naomi had brought in a forensic accountant to audit the extensive consulting fees Brooke had extracted from Threadline Systems over the years. The audit confirmed exactly what I had discovered. There was zero evidence of any actual work. Not a single marketing campaign, not one branding document, not a solitary email proving she had provided any value. Naomi drafted a brutal demand letter. It compiled every single suspicious invoice and legally reclassified them as unearned wages obtained under false pretenses. The letter demanded a full structured repayment. It included a very quiet but terrifying clause stating that failure to comply would result in the entire file being handed over for civil litigation and a potential tax fraud investigation. Then we moved to Glenn. My stepfather thought he was brilliant when he tried to forge my signature to restructure the massive loan for his lakefront boathouse. He thought he could outsmart the system. Naomi was 10 steps ahead of him. She had drafted a formal legal injunction completely removing my name from all pending or active guarantees associated with him. Furthermore, Naomi had already contacted the commercial credit broker he had emailed. She informed their fraud department that the signature on Glenn's application was a digital forgery and that I was formally contesting the document. We did not have to call the police to ruin him. The banking institution would freeze his application, red flag his credit profile, and likely call in the original massive loan immediately due to his fraudulent behavior. The final and most complex target was my brother Travis. He had built his entire luxury fitness brand on a foundation of my capital. The expensive imported equipment sitting on his gym floor was purchased with my personal funds and backed by a strictly documented loan agreement. When he panicked about my supposed bankruptcy, he was terrified I would call in that specific debt. But the reality was actually much worse for him. While digging through his financial footprint, Naomi had uncovered a massive structural weakness in his business. Travis was not just ignoring his debt to me. He was severely delinquent on his primary operational loans with a major commercial bank. He was months behind on his payments. The bank had classified his account as toxic debt. They were currently in the process of offloading his loan portfolio on the secondary debt market for a fraction of its original value just to clear it off their books. Naomi looked at me and asked if I wanted to simply seize his gym equipment and let the commercial bank tear the rest of his business apart. I looked out the massive window at the city below. I thought about the way he had banished me from his pristine lobby because my failure energy would ruin his vibe. I decided that simply watching him fail was not enough. I wanted to hold absolute power over his corporate survival. I instructed Naomi to form an anonymous limited liability company. We named the shell corporation Alder Row Capital. I used a microscopic fraction of the $10,500,000 I had just acquired from the Halcyon Grid Technologies buyout to fund the new entity, acting through a third-party corporate broker. Alder Row Capital swooped into the secondary debt market and legally purchased my brother's delinquent loan portfolio entirely in cash. The transaction was swift and perfectly legal. The massive banking institution was thrilled to get rid of the bad debt. Travis received a generic automated notice that his loan had been transferred to a new holding company. He likely panicked, assuming a ruthless collection agency was gearing up to seize his building. He had absolutely no idea that the faceless corporate entity holding the keys to his entire livelihood was actually his sister. I was no longer just his sibling asking for a favor. I was his primary secured creditor. I owned his debt. I owned his leverage. The person who would ultimately decide if his business lived or died was the very same woman he had refused to let park in his dirty back alley. With all the pieces perfectly positioned on the board, it was time to invite them to play the final game. Naomi drafted a beautifully worded, highly formal invitation and sent it to my mother, my stepfather, my brother, and my sister-in-law. The letter requested their mandatory presence for a private financial settlement conference at her high-end law firm on Tuesday morning. The wording of the invitation was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. It vaguely referenced the recent media reports of my massive financial success and suggested that the purpose of the meeting was to address outstanding familial obligations and restructure our mutual interests moving forward. It sounded incredibly diplomatic. When my family received those heavy cream-colored envelopes, they undoubtedly interpreted the legal phrasing exactly as we intended. They thought the storm was over. They believed that my brief period of rebellion had ended, and I was finally returning to my proper role as the obedient family bank. They probably assumed they were walking into a lavish boardroom to receive massive apology checks and finalize the funding for their vacation homes and wellness lounges. They thought I was softening. They thought the invitation was a desperate plea for reconciliation and emotional healing. Not a single one of them realized that the upcoming meeting had absolutely nothing to do with forgiveness or mending broken hearts. I had already finished crying over them. The private settlement conference was not a negotiation. It was the designated location where I would finally flip the board over, reveal the legal traps they had blindly stumbled into, and force them to pay the ultimate price for their profound and unforgivable greed. Tuesday morning arrived with a heavy gray sky. I sat at the head of the massive glass table in the primary conference room of Naomi's firm. The room was cold and smelled of expensive leather and polished glass. To my right sat Naomi. To my left was Daniel Voss, a sharply dressed forensic accountant with a completely unreadable expression. Next to Daniel sat a senior representative from the commercial lending division of Glenn's Bank. Promptly at 10 o'clock, the heavy double doors swung open. Diane, Glenn, Travis, and Brooke walked in. They had clearly coordinated their wardrobe to project an image of humble professionalism. Diane wore a subdued gray dress instead of her usual bright silk. Travis had swapped his tight athletic gear for a tailored navy suit. They took their seats on the opposite side of the long glass table. They looked at the extra people in the room with mild confusion, but quickly dismissed them. They were entirely confident in their own narrative. They believed my temporary moment of financial panic had passed, and I was finally ready to assume my role as their permanent safety net. Diane initiated the performance exactly as we predicted. She did not start with an apology for locking me out of her house. She started with a heavily rehearsed display of maternal sorrow. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a delicate tissue, dabbing at the dry corners of her eyes. She looked at me with an expression of profound manufactured tragedy. She spoke about the agonizing pain of a mother watching her highly successful daughter lose her way. She claimed I had been isolated and poisoned by outside influences who simply did not understand the sacred bond of family. She was clearly implying that Ryan and Naomi had manipulated me into briefly defying her. Before Diane could even finish her theatrical weeping, Travis abruptly cleared his throat and seized control of the conversation. He leaned forward and rested his hands on the glass surface. He adopted a deeply serious tone, completely abandoning the cruel insults he had hurled at me just days ago. He told me that the family had forgiven my erratic behavior because they understood the immense pressure of corporate acquisitions. Then he smoothly transitioned to his actual agenda. He stated that his premium fitness studio was facing temporary liquidity issues due to macroeconomic factors. He looked me dead in the eye and requested that I immediately restructure his debt and provide a massive injection of capital to protect the honor and the legacy of the family name. Brooke seamlessly followed her husband's pitch. She slid a thick, glossy presentation folder across the table toward me. She smiled a warm, practiced smile. She announced that she was officially dropping her previous consulting fees because she wanted to offer me something infinitely more valuable. Her new proposal was a comprehensive strategy to make me the central figurehead of a massive lifestyle brand built entirely around my newly acquired wealth. She painted a picture of international speaking tours and branded merchandise, casually mentioning that she would manage the entire global operation for a very reasonable percentage of the gross revenue. I sat perfectly still in my high-backed leather chair. I did not interrupt them. I did not sigh. I let them pour every single drop of their rehearsed manipulation into the quiet room. I watched them build their imaginary castles out of my hard-earned money. When Brooke finally finished speaking, a thick, expectant silence fell over the conference room. All four of them stared at me, waiting for the inevitable moment when I would cave to their demands and open my checkbook. I looked at Naomi and gave her a single slow nod. Naomi did not say a word. She simply reached out and pressed a button on the sleek control panel embedded in the table. The heavy motorized blinds covering the massive windows hummed as they descended, plunging the room into dim shadows. A high-definition projector descended from the ceiling and illuminated the large white wall directly behind me. The first slide snapped onto the screen. It was not a financial portfolio. It was a massive high-resolution screenshot of the family group text messages. Travis's cruel words, labeling me a toxic fraud and a complete failure, were magnified for everyone in the room to read. The next slide was Diane's vicious email officially cutting me off from the family and demanding I never use her address for my bankruptcy proceedings. The color instantly vanished from Diane's face. She dropped her tissue. Travis physically recoiled in his chair as if he had been struck. The presentation did not stop. Naomi clicked to the next slide. It displayed the fabricated gift registry Brooke had created, placed side by side with the forensic metadata analysis, proving it had been manufactured mere minutes before she sent it. Daniel Voss leaned forward and spoke for the very first time. His voice was clinical and devastating. He stated that attempting to reclassify legally binding corporate debt as personal gifts to defraud a bankruptcy court was a severe federal offense. Brooke opened her mouth to speak, but absolutely no sound came out. Then came the slide dedicated to Glenn, the screen filled with the email he had sent to the commercial credit broker, complete with the cropped and forged image of my signature. The bank representative sitting next to Daniel placed a thick manila folder on the table. The representative informed Glenn that his application for the boathouse renovation loan had been officially flagged for massive institutional fraud and that all his existing credit lines were currently frozen pending a full legal review. Glenn stared at the projected screen with wide, terrified eyes. His arrogant posture completely collapsed. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a live landmine. "You thought I brought you here to apologize," I said. My voice broke the suffocating silence. It was calm, measured, and completely devoid of any familial warmth. "You thought I was too soft to actually hold you accountable for the way you treated me when you believed I had absolutely nothing left." Travis desperately tried to regain control of the room. He slammed his hand against the table and pointed a shaking finger at me. He shouted that I was being vindictive and insane. He demanded that we immediately address his studio equipment loan before the aggressive secondary debt market buyers destroyed his entire business. He claimed a predatory firm called Alder Row Capital was already threatening to seize his assets. Naomi clicked the remote one more time. A new document appeared on the screen. It was the official corporate registration for Alder Row Capital. Directly under the list of managing partners was a single name. My name. I am Alder Row Capital. I told my brother. I kept my voice perfectly level. I used a fraction of my acquisition funds to purchase your toxic debt entirely in cash. You are no longer dealing with a faceless commercial bank. I own your equipment. I own your leverage. And you are currently 4 months delinquent on your payments to me. Travis stared at me in sheer absolute horror. The realization that his sister held the absolute power to legally dismantle his entire livelihood hit him with the force of a freight train. He slumped back in his chair, his mouth hanging open in silent disbelief. Before the room could even process that massive revelation, Daniel Voss turned his attention directly to Brooke. He slid a dense stack of printed server logs across the glass table. He informed her that his firm had conducted a deeply exhaustive forensic audit of the corporate servers at Threadline Systems. He stated with absolute certainty that there was zero digital or physical evidence that she had ever performed a single hour of actual work to justify the massive consulting fees she had extracted from my company. He told her she had exactly 14 days to agree to a full repayment plan, or he would formally refer the matter to the state tax authority for immediate criminal investigation. Brooke started to cry. It was not the fake theatrical weeping Diane had attempted earlier. These were the genuine ugly tears of a person watching their unearned luxury evaporate into thin air. I looked at the four people sitting across from me. They were completely shattered. Their fake humility was gone. Their aggressive demands were silenced. They were stripped bare and forced to look at the undeniable ugly truth of their own actions. They finally understood the gravity of their situation. I had not invited them to this beautiful corporate office to negotiate a truce or to hand them a portion of my $10,500,000. I had invited them here so they could clearly see the massive reinforced steel doors slamming completely shut right in their faces. I reached down into my leather briefcase resting on the floor beside my chair. I pulled out 4 separate heavy manila folders. I slid them across the smooth glass surface of the conference table. One stopped directly in front of my mother, Diane. Another rested before my stepfather, Glenn. The third and fourth settled in front of my brother, Travis, and my sister-in-law, Brooke. I kept my hands folded neatly on the table. Inside those folders are your final settlement agreements, I said, my voice cutting through the thick, heavy silence of the room. They contain the formal notices for the immediate termination of every single financial guarantee, the permanent revocation of all account access, and the legally binding demands for immediate repayment. You have exactly one option today. You sign them before you leave this building, or we bypass the civil negotiations entirely and move straight into formal litigation. I turned my gaze directly to Diane. Her hands were shaking as she opened the cover of her folder. I am severing every single financial tie we have ever shared, I told her calmly. Inside your packet is a printed ledger detailing every single unauthorized transaction you made on my corporate medical emergency card. Every luxury spa treatment and every first-class flight is highlighted. If you attempt to deny these charges or refuse to sign the termination agreement acknowledging your misuse of those funds, Naomi will immediately file a civil suit for the full misappropriated amount. Diane gasped loudly, clutching the lapels of her gray dress. I did not give her a second to formulate an excuse. I shifted my attention to Glenn. Your folder contains a permanent cease and desist order, I stated, staring down the man who had tried to steal my identity. You will never again attempt to use my signature, past or present, to leverage any commercial or personal loans. If you or your broker make one single additional attempt to attach my name to your lakefront property debt, Naomi will immediately forward the entire forged digital packet to the federal authorities for a criminal fraud investigation. You are completely on your own with the bank. Glenn swallowed hard, his face pale and sweating. He looked down at his paperwork as if it were highly radioactive. I looked across the table at Brooke. She was still wiping genuine tears from her face. Your packet outlines a very strict and non-negotiable repayment schedule, I told her. You will return every single dollar of the consulting fees you extracted from Threadline Systems over the last 2 years. The dates and the exact installments are clearly defined. If you miss a single payment, my forensic accountant will submit his entire findings to the Revenue Service and initiate a formal restitution lawsuit with a demand for a full tax audit of your personal finances. Finally, I turned to Travis. My brother was staring at the Alder Row Capital documents with a look of pure, unadulterated panic. Your situation is the most straightforward, I said, I own the debt on your fitness studio equipment. Your folder contains a new ironclad repayment contract under my holding company. You will sign it right now and agree to the accelerated payment schedule, or I will instruct my legal team to initiate the standard collateral seizure process outlined in your original default terms. I will have moving trucks at your facility by tomorrow morning to strip the building down to the bare concrete. The sheer weight of the absolute consequences finally shattered their composed facades. The room erupted into absolute chaos. Diane broke down into loud, wailing sobs. She slammed her hands on the table, calling me a cruel and heartless daughter who had entirely forgotten where she came from. Travis jumped to his feet, kicking his chair back so hard it crashed into the wall behind him. He slammed his fist down on the glass, shouting that I was systematically destroying our family out of pure spite. Brooke pointed a trembling finger at Naomi, screaming that this ruthless corporate lawyer had brainwashed me and poisoned my mind against my own flesh and blood. The noise was deafening. They were throwing every emotional manipulation tactic they had left in their arsenal. They played the victims, they played the martyrs, and they demanded sympathy. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell back. I simply sat there and watched them thrash against the unbreakable legal cage I had built around them. I waited until they ran out of breath. When the shouting finally died down into heavy panting and angry glares, I leaned forward. I looked at each of them, letting the absolute cold truth ring out in the quiet room. Not a single one of you panicked when you thought I had lost absolutely everything, I said softly. The words hung in the air, sharp and devastating. When I sat at my dining room table and told you I was entirely bankrupt, facing eviction, and terrified for my future, you did not shed a single tear. You did not offer a single dollar. You sprinted out the door to protect yourselves. You are not panicking right now because our family is falling apart. You are only panicking because you just realized you can no longer use me. The truth of that statement hit them like a physical blow. Travis slowly lowered himself back into his upright chair. Diane stopped her theatrical sobbing and stared at the floor. Brooke looked away, entirely unable to meet my eyes. Glenn remained completely silent, entirely defeated. I stood up from my high-backed leather chair. I picked up my favorite heavy silver pen. I leaned over the table and signed my final authorized signature onto the master copy of the settlement agreements. I placed the pen down with a soft, definitive click. I am not taking away your homes. I told them, my voice carrying a calm, final certainty. I am not taking away your meals, and I am not taking away your honor. I am simply terminating my obligation to pay for all of those things. From this exact second forward, you will fund your own lives. I did not wait to see if they picked up their pens to sign the documents. I did not need to. Naomi and Daniel would remain in the room to oversee the final legal execution. I turned my back on the people who shared my blood. I walked toward the heavy double doors. Ryan was waiting for me there. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was warm and solid and incredibly safe. We walked out of the conference room together. As I stepped into the carpeted hallway, I heard the faint, desperate voices of my mother and my brother calling my name, trying to offer belated, hollow apologies that were years too late. I did not turn around. I simply kept walking. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind us with a loud, solid thud, permanently sealing them inside a room with the massive bills they had created for themselves. In the months that followed that final meeting, I did not spend my time wallowing in the loss of my family. I took a significant portion of the $10,500,000 from the corporate acquisition and established a comprehensive private support fund. I dedicated it entirely to the loyal former employees of Threadline Systems who had worked the grueling late-night hours right alongside me. I ensured they received the massive bonuses and the financial security they actually deserved. Ryan and I sold our house in the city and purchased a beautiful, quiet property tucked deep in the wooded hills, far away from the noise and the toxic demands of my past. It was a place where the phone never rang with fabricated emergencies, and the doors were only open to people who genuinely loved us. As I sat on my new back porch, one crisp autumn morning, watching the leaves fall across the peaceful lawn, I finally understood the true value of everything I had been through. The most incredible thing I kept after the grueling sale of my software company was not the $10.5 million sitting securely in my investment accounts. The greatest asset I walked away with was a profound and absolute clarity. It was a brutal, agonizing lesson about the true nature of greed and conditional love. It was incredibly expensive to learn, but it was a lesson I was extremely grateful to have, knowing with absolute certainty that I would never have to buy it twice. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below and tell me your location so we can connect and share our thoughts together. Please remember to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people around the world.